One result of having a fair test that could lead to appointment to office and all the wealth and power that followed from that was an explosion in the number of candidates. By 1250, one scholar has estimated there were 450,000 people participating at all levels in the examination system, of whom 600, every 3 years, 600 only, were able to get the highest degree, what's called the Jinshu, or presented scholar, presented literatus degree. By 1600, there were probably around 800,000 people that had some kind of examination status. And we'll talk about the different kinds of statuses that had come into being by that point later, of whom only 300 earned an examination degree once every 3 years. And by 1850, there were something like 1.4 million people who had some sort of status in the system. And they still were only granting around 300 of the highest degrees once every 3 years. If the number of degrees granted at the highest level was so small relative to the total number of competitors, why would people ever continue to take the examinations? Why not just give up? From a literati point of view, from the point of view of literati families, why would you invest in having your sons study for the exam, something that might take them decades? It'd be like going to college and to graduate school. People generally, if they pass the highest level of exam, passed when they were around 30 years old. What would make it worthwhile to take the effort if your chance of really succeeding was between 1 and 2 to 5,000? To understand why this wasn't a waste of time, we have to understand something about the structure of the examination system. Namely, it was far less restrictive than the number of highest level degrees would suggest. This is because at the beginning of the Ming Dynasty, the government made, which in some ways was a wise decision, it decided to recognize people at the prefectural level and at the provincial level, as well as at the capital level. That is, it gave examination statuses at these different levels. So there were licentiates, or in Chinese, shengyuan, who had privileges at the local level where they went to school, and who then went on to the province where they took another exam, and if they passed that, then they went on to the capital to try for the highest level exam. Over time, the number of different examination statuses grew, and they became the single most important marker of social status in the Ming and Qing dynasties. Being an official was unquestionably a marker of the highest status. But all these other people, remember, by 1850, around 1.4 million, had some sort of legitimate status. And it brought certain privileges. Well, what kinds of privileges? It brought, for some people, a stipend. Not much of a stipend, but didn't hurt. It brought freedom from labor service. You did not have to get your hands dirty and provide service to the government. Now, some people have argued that the reason people took the exams was because it was like a lottery. You sort of know that you're not likely to win, but if you go in and spend a couple dollars a week, you have the chance of making $1 million, and somebody has to win sometime. Now, I think actually this explanation is wrong. A lottery is not much money, but your chances are very, very small. What I'm trying to say is that your chances of getting something out of the system were not bad at all. You might not get much, but you got something that made you different from other people. So even the lowest level degree holder, the licentiate, the shengyuan, had a tax break, no labor service, and had a status that set him apart from the vast majority of people where he lived. Now, I'll tell you one story now to give you a sense of how strong the weight was of this kind of status. It's a story that comes up in the novel The Scholars. It's about Fan Jin. And Fan Jin was a poor young scholar who had the dream of passing examinations and was always unsuccessful. And his wife's father, his father-in-law, was a butcher, and he lived with his wife's family. And his father was a nasty cuss. He slapped Fanjin around. He thought he was a fool. He thought he had no good sense at all. Well, Fanjin gets the right to go to the provincial capital to take the examinations. And lo and behold, he passes. And when he passes, he's so shocked that he collapses, goes unconscious, falls down on the floor. And the neighbors all think he's going to die. And the neighbors say to his father-in-law, well, slap him a little bit. Try to wake him up. Get him. And his father said, no, no, no. He's now going to be an official. I dare not touch him. He is like one of the stars in heaven who has come to life and been reborn here. This man has now, my son-in-law, who I used to beat up all the time, has now become a man of such great talent, great standard, and great promise that I dare not do anything except be obsequious to him. This was meant to be funny, but it also makes a claim. It makes the claim that examinations allowed for social mobility, that they were more important, in fact, than kinship, that you could transcend your circumstances by passing exams. This idea that the examinations were China's great mechanism for social mobility, that after the end of aristocracy, that the examinations allowed for sort of a more modern, socially mobile society of upwardly mobile people. We ought to sometimes think about downwardly mobile too, but we'll talk about that another occasion. This idea that it made people at the lower levels of society able to rise to higher levels, the marginal to become central, to go from poverty to wealth was very, very appealing. But in fact, it's been very sharply criticized. It's been criticized by scholars today who point out that the way in which upward mobility has been measured does not necessarily hold water. In brief, the way in which it's been measured typically is to look at who passes the examinations and then to look at the record of their father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. If none of those people pass the examinations, then we say, aha, that's a new man, new blood coming into the system. That is mobility. Well, when we look more closely at these new men, however, what we tend to discover is that they're deeply embedded in local kinship groups or lineages, that they have relatives who have passed the examinations or hold offices or so on. And in fact, some would even argue that when families establish themselves as local literati elites, beginning in South China in the 12th century, they are remarkably stable, and many of them last from the 12th century into the present day. But if this is so, what did examinations do? Well, if they're not a mechanism of social mobility, what could they be? I think what they might be is, in fact, a mechanism of social rotation. That is, we have existing educated people who are going to school, who are competing for the exams in very large numbers, who come from families where most of the boys are involved in the same kind of education. And what they're trying to do is make sure that those families all have an equal chance to send somebody into government. Well, I'm going to turn you over now to some people who are going to tell you about how the examination system in the Ming and Qing dynasties worked in greater detail. And when they're done, I'd like you to think about what surprised you most about what you heard and why it surprised you.